Good evening, Browns fans, and welcome to OBR Weekly. It's Wednesday at 7 o'clock. It's time for us to show up. One thing you may notice, if you are just tuning into the program, is a noticeable absence of Fred Greetham. He is not here tonight. He has a pressing commitment, but I have brought along a number of friends to try to help me through this without my security blanket beat writer of the last 30 years for the Cleveland Browns, Mr. Greetham. Please welcome in my co-hosts, Quincy Carrier, joining us tonight, as well as Jacob Roach. How you doing, guys?
Good. Nice to be on with you today on a Wednesday.
Yeah, I think this is the first time we have shared the stage here, Quincy, and it's about time. It's about time. I'm looking forward to it. And Jacob, welcome as well. We're going to be talking some draft here tonight for sure, and all kinds of good things. But one of the things I want to do, first of all, as you guys know, if you watch this program, we take a lot of questions on this program. So feel free to fill up the chat room with any questions that you have. And we've got a couple topics we're going to talk about here, but we're going to get around to questions at the tail end of the show. And we always want to talk about what you want to talk about. But we had a couple things that we were going to discuss here. And to discuss our first topic, which is Cam Ward versus Shedeur Sanders, we're bringing in Dave Syvertsen from Ourlads. Welcome, Dave, to the program.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you on. Your article got a ton of attention, Dave. People found it in the forums, and I think that they had been looking for this sort of comparison for quite a while. Because of such a difficult decision at the top of the draft. And what I'd love to be able to do is sort of break down, talk about each one of the criteria that you established and get Quincy and Jacob's take on it as well between these two quarterbacks. And you did a really nice job in that article of breaking down sort of the key considerations between the two quarterbacks. And the very first one is performance versus pressure. Which will be a key topic behind this particular offensive line next year. And Cam Ward had a QB rating that was 14 points lower, if I remember right, than Shedeur Sanders under pressure. And Shedeur was under pressure a lot more than Cam Ward was. Why don't you talk about the difference of the two quarterbacks?
Yeah, the difference is the good news here is when you're trying to decide which one of these quarterbacks to go after, at some point, it's going to become very clear because they're very different prospects, different backgrounds, and we all have our own things that we want out of a quarterback. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. You do have, and you can kind of lean into that after you do your full-blown evaluation process. And when it comes to pressure, Cam Ward, to me, he just, you can tell the inexperience that he has. And this is a guy, remember, a 0-star recruit. Nobody wanted him out of high school. He played in a wing T offense. He started off at Incarnate Word. Tell me one other player that's ever played there, right? I mean, that's how he came out of high school. Shedeur Sanders has been groomed to play quarterback since he was a toddler. And son of Dion, he's had the best coaching growing up. And it shows up in a lot of different areas. And to me, you really find out who a quarterback is when they are under pressure. And you could see Cam Ward is a backyard quarterback in a lot of ways because he has not developed the skill set necessary to defeat pressure on a repeated basis. He has enough talent to make some huge plays, and his highs are much higher than Shedeur Sanders. But if you look at the Duke tape, the Cal tape, the Georgia Tech tape, I mean, Cam Ward has made some decisions that would make you want to pull your eyeballs out on a Sunday, just, running to the sideline and chucking back to the middle of the field. Some things that you just cannot do when you've started as many games as he has.
Yeah, Jacob, you watched a bit of Sanders tape, I'm sure. How would you describe his offensive line and the protection that he was getting out there in Colorado?
So, I was watching for a draft profile for the website. I was watching Travis Hunter wide receiver tape, and you get so frustrated for how open Travis Hunter is, and you're like, well, what was Shadur? Sometimes it was on Shadur, but a lot of times I was watching it, and I'm like, oh, he's already on his back. No wonder, like, or he's running around, and like Travis Hunter's 30 yards downfield, and he's already on his back foot, and he has absolutely no chance. Like, it was, however bad you think his offensive line was this year, it was worse.
Yeah. Quincy, I think you may have discussed this particular topic once or twice on your programs in past weeks, but Cam Ward seems to be given some credit for being more maneuverable in the pocket than Shadur is. Do you buy that? Do you agree with that?
Cam Ward's definitely more maneuverable in the pocket. Like, he has the better short area athleticism, right? Like, if they did a shuttle drill, I think Cam Ward's probably going to come out on top with those numbers there. I do wonder what Shador's like numbers are there, right? Because I don't think his long speed's going to be anything spectacular, right? But if he can have the same type of short area quickness that like a Pat Mahomes has, then some of the escapability that Shador has does become more applicable to the NFL. I worry about if he sometimes Shador has the tendencies to do things great athletes can do in the NFL, but decent athletes can't do in the NFL, right? With Cam, I think the escapability is going to be there for him in the NFL. I just worry that he relies on it a little bit too much, right? Like, sometimes it feels like Cam's waiting for like something to break on the offensive line before he's willing to do something to get out the pocket or to get comfortable, or he's more comfortable once he breaks out. And I do worry about what that style of quarterback can do to a system that, you know, with Kevin Stefanski, what he likes to do, which is keep these guys on time, keep them in structure. And Cam, I worry about if he plays that way because that's just what he knows, or if he plays that way because that's just what he feels comfortable in, and he doesn't have comfort playing another way, right? Where we kind of found out that was one of the issues upon many of with Deshaun, where it's like, hey, once you ask this guy to structure it up a little bit, he gets super uncomfortable. He doesn't look like the guy that he was anymore. Right. With Shador, I have more confidence that, hey, if you put him in that kind of system, he will be able to be that. My thing with him is like his habits, he is built up off of being a great athlete at Jackson State, right? And FCS HBCU level. And then he goes to Colorado. Most of the time, it wasn't really a problem, but when he played those big time schools, right? You're talking about Latu last year, UCLA, you got the Oregon tape, and even BYU, and to a point Nebraska this year, it became an issue where it's like, oh, he's trying to roll out, and now he's getting chased down a lot more often. You know, that's my concern with Shador is how is his habits and athleticism going to translate to the NFL? My concern with Cam Ward is he able to be more malleable when it comes to the style of quarterback he's willing to play in the NFL? And is that even a good idea to approach with the quarterback? Is to think, hey, we got to change so much about you to get you where you are, because I feel like that can also be dangerous too.
Absolutely. And, you know, sort of moving on to the next item here, downfield passing. You know, Dave, you put together some statistics about completion percentage on passes over 20 yards. Now, I don't know if we know about further distances, you know, 25, 30 yards, whatever. But one of the complaints I keep hearing about Shadur is that he, quote unquote, doesn't have a big arm. Could you comment on that and whether that's a legit comment or not?
It's big enough, and I think that's all we need to know. It's big enough, and you know, we obsess, especially this time of year with the combine coming up. You know what their 40 times are, how fast they throw the ball, miles per hour. I mean, if you rank every 40 time and you rank every velocity a quarterback gets measured at the combine, and rank 1 through 50 in history, the best quarterbacks are not the ones with the best arms. There is a minimum that these guys need to have, and Shadur Sanders certainly has it. His arm strength is not a huge plus on his report, but it's nothing that should impede his potential to be a really quality quarterback. I mean, the guy has thrown the ball, in air on a dime, 60 yards. And what else do you really need? Can he make the throws to the opposite hash under some pressure without stepping into it? Well, that's where the difference in arm strength does show up. Cam Ward is much more capable of switching up his arm angle and firing from the hip and still putting the ball on a seed across the field. Shedeur Sanders can't do that. Is that a make or break? There's a lot of quality quarterbacks that can't do that either. That's not really a concern of mine with arm strength with Shedeur Sanders. These guys can both throw the deep ball at a really high level.
Okay. Quincy, let me point this one to you. I often think that having a big arm is as much of a negative as it is a positive at times. I remember guys like
Jay Cutler.
Trent Dilfer maybe comes to mind a little bit, who threw everything at 100 miles an hour, right? What's your take on being able to throw a ball through some sheet metal? How important is that?
Like was said earlier, right? It does matter because there are some balls that you need to drive, right? Like, how much of the field can you access? What options are going to be available to you, and how deep can we go on our playbook? How creative can we get based on what you can access, right? Like, I think arm strength does matter there. I do agree I think that with arm strength, sometimes we get so fixated on vertical ability, right? Your ability to push the ball downfield. We don't think about the other applications of arm strength where it does become important, right? Like, I think Josh Allen could throw the ball a mile, but the reason his arm strength is incredible is because 4 guys can be wrapped on Josh Allen. Yeah. He can have no access to his base, and he can still access like 70% of the field within a quick second. And like, that is where like that elite arm strength comes into play. I think it matters. Your arm strength matters as much as your play style makes it matter, right? If you have a play style where you're like Jameis Winston, I don't think we've ever had a conversation about his arm because he has a very, he's just going to stay in the pocket, hitch, and then throw something with his eyes closed if he doesn't see anything else. But it's not going to really test his arm strength because he's not going to be in a situation where his arm strength is going to be tested. Cam Ward, he needs a spectacular arm in order to stay afloat with doing what he does, because if he had a weak arm and did what he did, he would never have left Incarnate Word or never have maintained a starter there, right? With Shedeur, his arm's fine to kind of do what he does already. I do worry with the deep balls. They kind of hang in the air sometimes, and like with faster safeties, that might become an issue where they're going to be able to break that up. But, for the most part, Shedeur could drive the ball on most of his throws. I've never really watched him and thought, okay, I worry about arm strength. The same way, like with Will Howard, for example, you have questions like, hey, can he really drive the opposite part of the field? Like, what is his miles per hour going to be like? Like, can he spin it? I don't worry about Shedeur being able to drive it. I think he can throw a fastball, access all his pitches in the NFL level, especially because he doesn't play a style where he's not going to be leaning on that ability to throw crazy.
Right.
Yeah. Another way of looking at arm strength too and considering it is the ability to throw the ball through bad weather. And again, you said you put it out there, Quincy, the ability to spin it. How clean is the release? Are you constantly getting a spiral? And like that is a huge deal. If you're throwing ducks or wavy balls in bad weather, this is what we see out of Tua from Miami. When you put him to bad weather, that lack of pure arm strength and power and the inability to consistently spin it, that's when it shows up more. So with the downfield passing, both these guys are high quality down the field passers. And that's, it wasn't a discussion as much about arm strength. It was just, hey, can I create explosives with my arm? And that's a huge deal in the NFL. And I believe that both these guys, it's amazing how equally they graded out in that department. I mean, they were almost identical numbers to each other, and they both, that's a big positive on their scouting reports, is that they can create explosives with downfield passing.
I do have a question, because I've been trying to figure out how I feel about this with Shedeur, but I've noticed it seems like he feels most comfortable throwing the ball when he's moving downhill. Like he wants, like, even if he's not even under pressure, he takes a couple of extra steps down to kind of get the ball off. Do you think that's going to be a problem, or is that like a regular thing amongst quarterbacks in the NFL where they that's just a habit that some guys develop and it's ended up being a non-problem? Because I wonder about if that kind of adds into why he gets sacked so much, because sometimes I feel like he makes his tackles' lives a little bit harder than it needs to be.
He absolutely makes the offensive line's job a lot more difficult. Just there's a slowness to him in the pocket. It's nothing intelligence-wise. I just think he's so calm, cool, collected, almost too much for his own good. But when it comes to him throwing the ball while moving downhill, I think that's where you see the polish in him, because he really does feel that every single one of his throws needs to have full lower body, upper body cohesion, the footwork, the hip torque. I mean, you watch this guy train, it is almost robotic in a good way. He's very mechanically sound. You can tell he's been working at the craft for a long time, but to a fault, sometimes you're almost too reliant on that to make all of the throws. So when I see that on a tape, and I know exactly what you're talking about, he likes to really get momentum towards his target, but he's also obsessed with being mechanically sound and making sure he's lined up correctly before he throws it, where that is the antonym of Cam Ward. I mean, if you watch this guy throw, no one's around him and he's throwing ball, he fades to the left just because he just wants to throw a sidearm pass for no reason. And that's why you see the discrepancy in his ball placement on easy throws sometimes. So I don't think, I would not count that against him at all, the fact that he wants to be lined up. If anything, he's doing his job and he expects others around him to do their job.
Let's move on to the next criteria, and this is what's really got me excited about Shedeur Sanders. Some of the things you said about the ball placement and accuracy, the folks that you're talking to at Ourlads, the analytics guys, are putting Sanders well above Ward in terms of accuracy.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say, if you want, his last year's quarterback class is still pretty fresh in everyone's head, I'm assuming. I would put his ball placement and accuracy above all those guys by a pretty wide margin as well. Jaden Daniels was right there with him if you're comparing numbers from the analytic guys, the department that we have. But this is why mechanics matter. Accuracy is often derived from how repeatable your footwork is. And yes, the release point and then some natural arm talent. I get the question all the time, can accuracy be taught? Can it be developed? And my answer is always, technique and mechanics can be taught and developed in time. So that alone can improve the accuracy. He's already head and shoulders above most guys that come out of college in that department. I don't have Shedeur Sanders graded as high as those guys last year. Jaden Daniels was our QB1 at this time last year. He's not close to that level. But when you're just talking about the accuracy part of the scouting process, he is there. And that's what's going to give him a fighting chance at the next level, is he knows where that ball is going. And I've watched every single one of his throws multiple times to a point where I could see them in my dreams. He puts the ball almost always exactly where it needs to be. And that is something that, if the situation around him is there, that's where he's going to succeed at a high level.
After watching the Browns these last couple of years, the two quarterbacks who had moments of success for the Browns, one was Joe Flacco, the other, Jameis Winston, had moments of success, right? And both of them would throw the ball ruthlessly into coverage, right? I mean, they would make throws that made my heart stop, before they got to the receiver. And Jacob, it just seems to me like in the Stefanski offense that pinpoint accuracy is so important, perhaps more than it is in other offenses. But then again, I'm a bloviator, not a scout. But it just seems to me like this is an attribute that Kevin Stefanski would get very enthusiastic about.
Yeah, and that's why, I've been kind of low on Shedeur Sanders overall because of some of the limitations that he has. We've talked about the arm strength and the athleticism and some things like that. But I see why people like the idea of him with Kevin Stefanski. That is, even though I would rather do Abdul Carter and, do some things like that and whatnot. If it's Shedeur, I see why. There's he can be surgical at times with that accuracy. Just pinpoint exactly where he wants it to be. And that's where you also see that he does have an NFL arm, is he'll drive it into some of those windows and just put it in a placement between, I've seen him do it. He won't take the crazy chances that Jameis would take, because that's another thing that Kevin would love, is the turnover worthy play percentage was one of the lowest in the nation this year with Sanders. And that's because when he takes what you would call a risk, he knows he's going to make that throw. He knows that he can put that ball in that placement, or he can place that ball in a place where it's not putting it at risk. Like when he is protected, when he's seeing the field, he can be a surgeon back there, and he can pick you apart. Like physical limitations, sure, but like if you're saying, hey, I know you don't like Sanders, but like Kevin Stefanski likes him, I'd be like, I know, I see it.
Totally get it. Let's move on to the fourth criteria, which we've talked about a little bit already, which is his dual threat potential. And once again, here, neither of these guys are going to confuse anyone with for Jaden Daniels. Isn't that right, Dave?
Yeah. I mean, these guys are not going to make any money with their legs if they decide to work out at the pro day or combine. And I wouldn't be surprised if these guys don't work out. They don't time anything because they're not going to gain anything, and they could lose a little bit of momentum. But and that's been a thing with quarterbacks. They don't really need to run the 40 anymore. And you're not gonna draft anyone that is this kind of quarterback for that reason. So let's just kind of get that out of the discussion. But there is something about the dual threat that goes beyond making the Lamar Jackson runs that I think needs to be considered here. And it's the ability to miss sacks. And that is an area of Shedeur Sanders' game that I am alarmed by. He is small. We'll probably see an inflated number with his weight at the combine, similar to what we've seen with Jaden Daniels and J.J. McCarthy last year. You could easily put 10 pounds on these kids. But last year, my official measurement that came from a scout was 198 pounds. And you're playing, if you're even close to sub 2 at quarterback and you're not an elite athlete, that's going to be a problem at the next level. It's not a deal breaker, but it's a significant problem. And then you watch the tape and you watch the amount of sacks that he does not miss. And then you consider the fact that it is one of the biggest correlations to scoring points in the NFL is avoiding sacks on a drive. That's a problem. That's one thing Shedeur has not proven yet. You can blame the offensive line all you want. He did after the Nebraska game in front of the media, but if you can't avoid sacks, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Cam Ward, I think one of the strengths to his game is the fact he plays like that Mahomes slippery style. He can feel the pass rush, almost annoying to play against. And he's about 20 pounds heavier, if not even a little more. He's a lot thicker, and neither of these guys are going to run away from real speed at the NFL level, but there is a skill to avoiding pressure within the pocket and breaking tackles. That's what Cam Ward can do. Shedeur Sanders, I'm not too sure about that.
Quincy, you think that's a fatal flaw for Shedeur Sanders?
Yeah, because like you mentioned earlier, they blame this on his offensive line. I watched him at Jackson State for 2 years, have the same kind of things that kind of get him in trouble. Even at the FCS level where his offensive line was not the disaster. And he only really, I would say his 2023 offensive line was straight up bad, just a disaster. But 2024 line, it wasn't as much of a disaster as the numbers would make you believe. I do think Shedeur does kind of create some of these problems. With him, the escapability is a giant concern, right? Like the durability of him, how many hits can he take? He's going to have to be somebody who stays in there. An underrated part of Stefanski's offense and why he prefers a bigger quarterback is you're going to have to take a lick, right? Because sometimes you got to wait for that backside dig to come across the field and you just got to throw it, right? Even if you can't see it, sometimes you got to throw it. And we talked about accuracy. Shedeur can layer it over these linebackers, and I really trust his ability to work that intermediate part of the field. The question is can he hold up if that's what you ask him to do, especially in the AFC North where it's not normal defensive linemen you're going up against, right? There's Cam Hayward, there's TJ Watt, there's Trey Hendrickson, right? And even with Cam Ward, right? He might have the more weight on him, but this is something we saw with Deshaun where it's hey, Deshaun had tremendous breakaway ability even early in his career in Cleveland. About getting out the pocket, but sometimes that would lead to him putting himself in even more vulnerable positions where he can get even harder outside the pocket, right? And both these quarterbacks have that concern. Shedeur especially because he doesn't really have a step-up game, right, where he can step up, hitch, and then throw. He usually steps up and runs, up the middle, which he's not going to survive doing that in the NFL. So, yeah, I worry about durability with both these quarterbacks for, two specific different reasons. And I think that's just kind of, if you want to take a quarterback bad enough at 2, you just got to be willing to accept that risk there, because there's not anybody here who's built like Drew Aller, right? Where you're like, all right, well, he'll be able to learn through that over the course of a few weeks, where it's like the hit ain't going to take him out. He's not, right? So that's just, I think, part of course with this class, where both these guys are probably going to come in 6'1"-ish, maybe like around a little under 6'2". And Shedeur I'd be surprised if he comes in at like 205, because everybody says he's under 2 bills. And then Cam, you said he's what, 215?
Yeah, I'll get you the actual number I got from last spring. I think it's closer to 220.
Wow.
Let's see. I have it right here.
Yeah, that's what I had. I don't know.
Yeah, I had 220. So, it's a pretty thick frame. Him and Jackson Dart are both thick dudes. And that does make you feel a little bit better about them taking hits. But again, you don't want to overanalyze that. It's like a lot of these little things. It's like putting together a puzzle of a quarterback evaluation. Is you want to make sure you don't weigh too much. But again, if you're watching this right now and you want to decide between these two guys, it's okay to lean into certain. You want a bigger, thicker dude? All right, you got to go for Cam Ward. You don't care that much, then you're going to lean towards Shedeur Sanders, and that's the art of scouting.
Right. Well, the last criteria that we wanted to talk about was what you refer to as leadership in high leverage situations, and here we get out of the analytics. We get into very subjective analysis of leadership styles of these two guys. How would you describe their leadership styles, Dave?
Very different, to be honest with you. And again, this is why I think the evaluation is pretty easy. And take it with a grain of salt. I don't know these guys personally. I'm not interviewing them over and over again, and I know that. But I've done this for a long time, and I do part of my scouting evaluation for quarterbacks is I watch press conferences after losses and after wins, and I kind of see, and I try to put a little e-value on that based on historical trends of how guys act. And they're very different personalities. They're both ultra confident, which you would expect at this stage. But Shedeur Sanders is like that new age, million Instagram followers, bring some swagger. People want to be around you. Can elevate the room. Whether we personally agree with it or not is completely irrelevant. Young kids like that. They want to be around that. They want to be on TikTok. They want to be on your reels. And, Malik Neighbors just happened to be in Times Square with cameras around him when Shedeur Sanders was carrying a football down the street during the Heisman weekend, but like they like that stuff. It brings swagger to a locker room. And Cam Ward, to me, is more of like the, hey, chip on my shoulder. Nobody believes in me. I'm going to come get it. I'm going to earn everything I have. I'm going to continue to ascend in quality as I ascend in level of competition. And it just, to me, they're completely different backgrounds, completely different ascents to where they are right now. And I think that they're going to differentiate themselves in locker rooms. And the one thing I don't like about Shedeur Sanders is that it does seem like everything he does is rehearsed. It does seem like it is for the cameras. And then I don't like how he threw his offensive line under the bus against Nebraska. And again, I don't want to hold bad decisions against the young kid. If we were all held up to that microscope when we were young, we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. So,
right.
But it's part of the process. And I think what Cleveland just went through with Deshaun Watson, I think it needs to matter more than what most people think. Is this guy really going to inspire people around him? The last thing I'll say about Shedeur that worries me is his dad's been his coach essentially his entire life. This next year will be the first time his dad is not his coach, I think, dating back to pre-high school. And no longer having daddy around. And you're in an NFL locker room with guys you are now trying to put food on their table for their families by playing football games and winning. It's a different level of pressure. There's some entitlement to Shedeur Sanders potentially. With that said, the information I do have on him and his work ethic is second to none. The guy is addicted to the game. He knows the game inside and out. He wants to be a winner. He is trained to be great. So I don't want to create a bad image on him, but there are some objective facts about how he's been brought up that I do think need to be considered.
All right. Well, Dave, I want to thank you very much for hanging out with us and sharing your comparison of these two quarterbacks. We kept you for half an hour and appreciate you hanging in there. Remember, if you want to check this out, go to Ourlads.com. Ourlads has a new insider capability, new insider offering, where they have updated depth charts They've got all kinds of analytics about the draft. I mean, you want to dive in deep on scouting. Ourlads has always been the place that I would recommend to fans. So keep up the great work there at Ourlads, and say hi to your friends over there for me. We've worked together for quite a while.
Absolutely will do, guys, and appreciate your time. It was nice to meet you guys. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you, Dave. All right, Dave Syvertsen giving us some food for thought. Quincy, let me turn to you on this whole leadership style thing. I, not being a guy who spent time in locker rooms or whatever, just thinking from the perspective of a fan who talks to a lot of fans, was sort of leaning toward the Shedeur Sanders type of persona and approach, because I think that this team needs a personality reboot, or maybe just a personality injection to a certain degree under Stefanski. They need a reboot in general. Man, we are in the pits right now with Myles Garrett wanting to leave, going 3-14 last season. The disappointment, all that. I want a fresh start. I want some hope on the horizon, and Shedeur sort of gives me that. But tell me your take, Quincy, on which one of those guys you think would make a bigger impact on the fan base and on this football team in the short term.
Yeah, you're talking about a crisis of confidence, right? With Browns fans and the Browns right now, just not a very confident time for Cleveland Browns fans. And look, Shedeur would probably bring he's Mr. Confidence, right? He has his own celebrations. He feels like a superstar already. So if you draft him, at least before we get on the field and we know what he's going to be as a player in the NFL, it's going to be similar to Johnny, where it's like, oh, you feel like you got a superstar, right? Because you're getting that similar effect, because he is a superstar right now coming out of college. As far as his leadership style goes, look, the thing with leadership, it can look a lot of different ways as long as you good. Right, as long as you good, Jameis Winston style works when he's playing well, right? Cam Newton had a different style of going about it. When that worked, when he was playing well. The truth about leadership in the quarterback position, Deshaun was a good leader in Houston until he stopped playing well. The leadership stuff started to stop mattering, right? Leadership at the quarterback position, it's really about how much you could back it up with your play. If Shedeur is able to play well, they will give him slack when he says something crazy to one of these dudes that are professional, right? Like they'll give him that conversation. Now, if he's not playing well and he's doing that, then it's going to become a huge problem. Same way with Cam Ward's body language. You can look at Cam Ward, and we went through this with Jed. Nobody cared about Jed Will's body language when he was playing well in 2020. But as the play dipped, the conversation about that body language, it ramped up, right? And Cam Ward, sometimes he just stands still. Sometimes it looks like he's very disinterested in what's going on, right? Like the disinterested look he had at the Pop-Tart Bowl, where it's like, oh, does this guy really even care?
Right.
That stuff matters when you start losing. So both these guys have things I think would be big problems that will present themselves, at least from a fan base perspective, if they start losing. The fact is that this city is so desperate for a quarterback right now.
Yeah.
It ain't going to take much to get us excited, right? Like, I know people can act like they're not going to be excited about Kirk Cousins. Let Kirk Cousins throw 12 for 12 in a preseason game and score a touchdown. Next thing you know, everybody's on board, right? So it's not going to take much for Browns fans to get excited if you present some type of positive case for them on the football field. Cam and Shedeur, if you're looking for that excitement on draft day, if you're looking for that hope on draft day, they will give you that. The one thing I will caution people with is we've done this before. Right? We have drafted because we want to feel good, and we wanted to feel better at quarterback than what the situation currently presented, and it's usually end up as a mistake, right? Brady Quinn going back in the first round. Let's go get him. He's from Cleveland. That's gonna make it might be like Bernie Kosar. Like, I saw the narrative as a child rise up, and then Bernie's at his first game where he was on the call in the preseason, and he's like, "Oh man, he looks great," and we lost our minds about the ideal of that, and it felt great, but it did not end well, right? Another example of this is Johnny Manziel, where like we completely were like, hey, we just want to feel good about quarterback. And for a little bit, it felt good, and then he played, and then all that feeling went away, right? For me personally, I am tired of feeling good about the ideal of quarterback. I did that for 3 years with Deshaun Watson, where I'm like, oh man, it might be something, right? Back and forth with Baker Mayfield, where we were like, oh, he's gonna turn that corner, and then he's terrible. You know, we did that back and forth with Baker Mayfield. I want the Browns to take a swing that they 1,000% believe in, right?
Yep.
And if that guy is in this draft, even if I'm not a big fan of the guy, I'll be like, okay, let's see what happens here, right? Because I've never seen an organization with this much continuity be able to make a choice at quarterback at Cleveland. So I was like, okay, whatever. But if you're making this choice because you feel like you got to do something at quarterback, that's where I worry about you making a long-term mistake. Because what if you make this selection here, it kind of is okay, and then in 2026 you come around, you're like, my God, Lenore Sellers, that's the perfect guy for me, right? And you can't get Lenore Sellers. So that's all I ask of the Browns front office is like, hey, look, I know there's going to be pressure to take a quarterback. Everybody wants to take a quarterback in Cleveland right now. The Browns want to take a quarterback. You really got to be strict about, is this the quarterback that you're okay with taking, or is this the quarterback that you want? Because you got to take the dude you want, the dude that you feel like can really make things happen in a way that Jaden Daniels made things happen in Washington or somewhere similar, because you don't want to push in all the chips and then like in 5 years you're looking at like, oh, this guy might be Tua, right? Like that's not a good situation either. And then you would have, by then you waste the primes of Denzel Ward. If you can keep Myles Garrett, right? All these other guys, they're going to be 33 by then. So a real tough decision here, and I don't envy them, but you got to make a decision based on what you truly feel as an organization, based on the football, and not about how we want to feel, because there are downsides to that.
Yeah, my take on this has been, and Fred, if he were here, would be rolling his eyes already because I say it pretty much every week, which is that give me whatever quarterback Kevin Stefanski demands to have, right? Give him a list of the free agents, give him a list of the draft picks. If you believe in one of those guys, go take them, right? Kevin Stefanski specifically for your offense. You agree, Jacob?
Yeah, I've said it wholeheartedly that I think this should be Kevin Stefanski's decision, whatever that is. I don't know if it's free agency, a trade, a quarterback, whatever it is. I said, will I throw a little bit of a fit if they draft Shedeur Sanders? Of course, I'll throw myself a little pity party because that's just not the direction I would go. But I still believe Kevin Stefanski's a good coach. So if he looks you in the eyes and is like, Shedeur is my guy, I can win with this guy, I feel like I believe him. But like, it's one of those things. Don't take a quarterback just to take a quarterback. Please don't do that. Yeah, but if that's your guy, I don't care. Everybody knows how I feel about Jackson Dart. Everybody knows I'm not a Jackson Dart believer. I don't care if it's Jackson Dart at 2. If you think that's the guy, do it. I mean, I'll be very upset. But
I'm not gonna lie, I would care.
Might have some opinions on that.
The sentiment's the same, right? Like that's all I'm saying. Like the sentiment is like you go get your guy.
Right.
Yeah, you want this to be something where Kevin feels comfortable like putting his name on in a way that like he never really did on Baker Mayfield or even Deshaun Watson to an extent where it was like it always felt like somebody else's move. And maybe he's just the last guy left that we have some level of confidence in, and maybe that's why we're like this with Kevin, right? Or maybe there's something to it because we've seen him have some level of success with guys at the quarterback position. But I also think this is an important offseason for Kevin Stefanski to figure out exactly what it is that he wants in a young quarterback, right? We know what he's had success with, but there has been this dissonance between guys they've brought in, and the skill set that they have and the traits that they have versus guys that they've had. Kevin has a history of having success with, right? Kirk Cousins, Jacoby Brissett, he has some success with, Jameis Winston, and well, you could put that somewhat on Ken Dorsey, but And then Joe Flacco is the biggest obvious one, right? Those are the guys that he has had that level of success with, but we brought in guys like DTR who are athletes. Kellen Mond was a developmental guy on this roster for a long time. We brought in Tyler Huntley in the preseason, right? They were talking about Joe Milton in last year's draft. So what is it that they're actually looking for? I would love to know Kevin's take on that, right? Because I think we think some of this is AB, Deshaun Watson, another guy who's not like in Stefanski's wheelhouse of skill set that we've seen him in. But I really think we need to have a good idea of like where that is with Kevin, because I have no clue what it is that he's actually looking for. I can only just point out guys. I'm like, well, he's had success with guys like this before, right?
Exactly.
So that's why I think we're all in agreement. Kevin's got to be able to put his name on this one for anybody to feel any kind of like decency about it. And if it's one of those things where it's like, oh, Kevin doesn't even feel good about putting his name on, it's like you just feel like you're going to repeat the last 3 years. Well, last 6 years.
Right. Well, I tell you what, if Shedeur wants to weigh in at over 200 pounds and over 2 bills, he better hit himself some Core Home Fitness. Absolutely. Yeah, you guys know about our sponsor, Core Home Fitness. You can find them at corehomefitness.com. Visit the website. They've got a new app now. They've got all kinds of videos, all kinds of stuff like that. Go check them out. Of course, you know about their adjustable dumbbells, very best on the market. Consumer Report says so. Men's Health says so. Everybody who's anybody says that these are the best adjustable dumbbells you could possibly get. So if you want to get in shape, add some thickness, and not the Barry McBride type of thickness, maybe more the Jackson Dart type of thickness, go to Core Home Fitness and get their products. They've got a U.S.-based support team, fast shipping, hassle-free returns, you name it. They know what they're doing. And, of course, they have stepped up to sponsor the OBR, and they rock. They are responsible for us being able to bring you all this fine programming that we're bringing you. So thank you to Core Home Fitness. All right, guys, let's change it up a little bit right here. I've got a couple other topics I want to talk about, and I want to get to some questions in the 20 minutes here. But the first is, I guess, all three of us have talked about this Myles thing on YouTube over the course of the last week or so, right? Probably has talked it to death. The one thing that I would tend to say is that just as someone who talks to a lot of fans, that the adventures on Radio Row do not appear to have done Myles any favors in terms of moving the needle of public sentiment in his direction, right? Bringing up LeBron James' name in particular seems to have been not all that well received. But I guess the question is, a couple things about the public and the analysts and everybody saying, oh, yeah, just go ahead and trade him, get him while the getting's good. Jacob, I'll ask you first. Do you think the public and even the media senses how freaking difficult it is to move Myles Garrett?
No, I don't think they understand the ramifications from a cap standpoint, contract standpoint, and all of everything else that comes around it. Because, you see things like Joe Thomas's, and I know Pete wrote on the website about what Joe Thomas said about it right before the season. People are just like, oh, he's out, he's gone, move on, get all these picks. And it's like, okay, but you want $39 million in dead cap and completely reset because that you may not be in, cap hell right now. You're going to be if you throw another 39 of dead cap on top of that and put yourself in a position where you're moving on with it's not, I don't see any benefit for the Browns. There's no incentive for them to do it. I get the picks, but the picks that you're going to try to get is to get a player as good as, Myles Garrett. You're going to try to use at least one of those picks to get somebody that's Myles Garrett, who you already have. And right. I don't think he has leverage in this situation. I think Cleveland has all the leverage. And when you look at that contract specific, because he even said, they asked him, what would you willing to do with the contract to make it happen? He said, whatever it takes. Well, it just doesn't work like that. And Jack Duffin has outlined it. He can't, unless he wants to just void it. I'm sure there's a way to do that, but I know he's not going to, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Like
not without the NFLPA getting involved and probably telling him he can't do
that's
that.
a
Right? Like,
good. And that's a good point. I never even thought about it from the union standpoint in that sense. So it's like, it's not like everybody acts like this is a super easy thing to do, and it's just not.
And Quincy, the other perspective too is that of Andrew Berry, right? We don't know how Andrew Berry is being judged or graded by Jimmy Haslam in terms of his job security. In 2025, if he doesn't win 5 games, is that it for him? Because if it is, I'm not moving Myles Garrett for future assets.
I find it hard to believe they would do it. I mean, like Jacob made the point about the assets. I mean, the assets not even being equal to the player, right? But you're not trading. If you're trading for Myles Garrett, you're not just trading for the Browns to give you Myles Garrett. You're also trading for the Browns to eat an enormous amount of their own cap. So the price goes up to factor that. And I hear people like, oh, they could just throw Micah Parsons in there. Like, hey, we got to eat that money too. Like, so that's more money that we don't have that we're eating. And like Myles is $39 million a dead cap. Even if you restructured Deshaun Watson, it's $39 million of money that's going to go towards a dude who's 100% not going to pay. He's not technically dead cap, but he's also dead cap, right? So we're talking about around like $80 million for 2 players who are not going to play for you on top. So what's that worth? Like, how much do you need in return? And the price that you're going to have to give is going to be ridiculous. And I don't think the teams that would be desperate enough to do it, which is another part of this, right? I heard people like, hey, man, the Chicago Bears might do this or the New England Patriots might do this. And I'm like, the only teams that are going to do this are teams that watch Philadelphia do what they did to Kansas City and say, that's my ticket to get past them, right? I can really only see 2 teams thinking that. Buffalo and maybe the Texans. And the only reason I include the Texans because they're the only team that has a crazy enough assortment of assets. And I'm like, they could make something work if they really wanted to, right? Like the Texans could be like, we could trade Derek Stingley or swap out Will Anderson or use some of their exciting young players to divvy up some assets to make this worthwhile for Cleveland. They could even absorb Deshaun Watson if they wanted to, right? And then make a bunch of restructures to get that under the cap. Maybe somebody does something creative like that, but Buffalo, they're just not in that position, right? They're at a late stage of their championship window. This is not the kind of move they can do. And like Jacob said, you might get Myles Garrett. I'm going to tell you this right now. If you trade it for Buffalo's 2 firsts, you're not getting anything close to Myles Garrett with those first-round picks.
No.
Because that's a really second-round pick. Yeah, you're getting something closer to like Zadarius Smith, right? Like that's a great outcome for a late first-round edge rusher. Not necessarily Myles Garrett. So yeah, just the math for this year does not make enough sense for the Browns on a value perspective. And I don't think it's going to make sense for the teams that are going to be looking into this from a value where they're like, oh, well, let's just offer them 2 first-round picks or something, or first and a third next year. And the Browns are going to be like, hey, man, here's what we have to eat. It's just not going to be affordable at that price. And, we'll see how much Myles is willing to make this uncomfortable. But the Browns have absolutely no incentive to entertain phone calls right now. And it seems like that is what's going on. They're not really going to entertain phone calls because I don't think they feel like an offer that would even make them think about it is going to come across their table. If they thought it was the case, they would be trying to fire up the market right now, right? But that's not the case. This isn't even like Brandon Ayuk last year where San Francisco thought they could get some kind of equivalent value for him. This is a situation where the Browns feel like, he's going to be on this roster for 2025. Now in 2026, it becomes a much more feasible conversation for the Cleveland Browns because maybe you have the ticket to get the Browns the first round pick they need to get a quarterback or something like that, right? Yeah. But 2025, we'll see what Myles is willing to do. But one thing I know is you can't win championships unless you're playing for a team, and that's his real only option is to say, I'm not going to play this season to make things uncomfortable. And the Browns might be okay with that at the end of the day if it comes down to it.
Well, he certainly is, ripped off the Band-Aid with his time on Radio Row and some of the comments that he has made. And it'll be a challenge to sort of walk it back, at this point. But, for the amount of money he's being paid and for the value he brings to a team, you could see that maybe accommodations could be made if things calm down a little bit here. I just want to quickly talk about Kirk Cousins. I wrote about him a little bit this morning. We've talked about him a little bit. The reason I bring him up is because I just have, I do this newswire thing every morning where I'm poring over all the links, and I'm seeing so many different links from other cities with teams saying, oh, yeah, we'll just get Kirk Cousins. The Giants and the Jets. We'll just get Kirk Cousins. He'll be the bridge. And the problem with Kirk Cousins is that there's only one of them.
Yes.
And Derek Carr may not be available. These bridge quarterbacks may not be all that easy to get. But when I wrote that this morning, the comments on the water cooler and in response to the article were not kind. They were kind to me, okay, but they were not kind to Kirk Cousins. They're basically saying, man, he's washed. If he's the answer, what the heck is a question? That sort of stuff here. So I'm just going to put it to I'll put it to you first, Jacob. You look at Kirk Cousins last year. I view there as being three possibilities, right? One is that the Falcon system was not the right system for Kirk Cousins, right? The second, he's injured, right? He's coming off an Achilles. He's talked about other injuries. And then third is that he's 37. He's just done. You have any opinions on this matter?
I tend to lean a little bit more towards two, just from the injury, from a simple standpoint of a lot of the issues early in the season that I saw with him was a lack of mobility. Now, I'm never going to say that you could mistake Kirk Cousins for Lamar Jackson at any point in his career, but he was at least able to move around. And when I say lack of mobility early in 2024, I mean, he was just the definition of a stone statue, and it didn't look like he had much drive on a lot of the ball when he was trying to drive it outside the numbers or throw down deep. And with the Achilles injury, it's usually the year after that it comes back. So do I think because I look at how good he was his last year in Minnesota, and obviously it's not an MVP level, but that level of drop off and change, I tend to think that he gets somewhere between the two is where he actually is. In terms of what you would get with him in Cleveland is somewhere between 2023 and 2024 when he's healed up a little bit, but Father Time is coming for him too. So it's definitely a decline is there, but I think that he's better than what we saw last year if he's healthy in 25.
Right. So Quincy, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being let's give Jamarcus Russell another chance, 10 being let's go trade for Joe Burrow. Where do you put Kirk Cousins as being the solution to the Cleveland Browns problems? Do you think that he's the answer?
I think for this year, given how I feel about the quarterback class, I put this because it gives you flexibility for the next few years. And it doesn't tie you in long term. It's not going to be something that's expensive. I do put this above drafting a quarterback this year. Your mileage may vary based on how you feel about quarterbacks this year in this year's draft. I think the best possible solution is Matt Stafford or something like that, right? I think we all agree that would be amazing if they could get him. But yeah, with Kirk Cousins, look, I have a rule of Kirk Cousins. I have a Kirk Cousins theory, which is Kirk Cousins is never as bad as people say Kirk Cousins is, but he's always never as good as people want to make him out to be, right? You always have to play this balancing act with Kirk because he has the same amount of people who love him and the same amount of people who hate him. Barry, if you would have put that comment up about the Browns, Kirk Cousins 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when he left Washington, the comment section would have been the same. He's not good. He's not worth the money. Now, here's the one thing about Kirk Cousins and the conversations we're used to having about Kirk that I don't think we've recalibrated for. The same thing with Russell Wilson last offseason. Kirk Cousins, most of the conversation we've had has been about him being a top paid quarterback, right? We've been talking about him and money for like the last 10 years, right? He was the first fully guaranteed quarterback. People forget that one. But he was also paid a bunch of money in Washington before he left there, got a bunch of money in Atlanta. This offseason, if he hits free agency, which he's likely to hit free agency, he will not be expensive. So does the conversation about Kirk Cousins recalibrate because he's not going to be a $45 million quarterback anymore? He's going to be a $1 to $3 million quarterback, right? How much does that change the evaluation on Kirk? And I think it does change it tremendously for me. Look, if Kirk comes here, I know how we get about quarterbacks. He's going to have a good run here for a certain period of time where he might win like 6 out of the first 9 games, and we're going to lose our minds. We're going to get Kirk Cousins mania. Then Kirk's going to have some bad games. And that's the thing with Kirk. He's going to be violently Kirk Cousins, right? Before he got his shoulder, his shoulder injured against the Saints, he was on his way to another one of those. And this is Kirk Cousins seasons, right? Where like you go 10-7 or maybe 11-5, and you kind of just have whatever rest of the season that you have with Kirk. That's what Kirk is here for. As long as you keep that in perspective and you're not paying $1 billion for Kirk Cousins, I don't think it's a good option. And you just got to keep your expectations at Kirk Cousins. And that's the issue I think people have had with Kirk, is that he could play well enough to make you believe, but never well enough to make you succeed in the way that you wish you could succeed.
Yeah, that makes sense. A couple comments coming out of the chat room. I'm sorry, guys, on the chat room. I was busy trying to navigate things today. I was not as jumping on the comments and on the questions as much as I usually am. But this one from Kelly, saying Browns needed face of the franchise, new stadium in Brook Park, Barry Stefanski, Reese Musgrave have their lump of clay, make it work. And I think that's in response to Shadur Sanders, the comments on Shadur Sanders about the face of the franchise. But either way, I'm not sure Kirk Cousins really reboots that, at least not consistently like you were saying, Quincy, because he'll be an up and down quarterback.
Yeah, he will be Kirk Cousins. And I get people's desire to want to face of the franchise quarterback, but this is not something you can put in your computer and print at home and then boom, you get yourself a franchise quarterback, right? You cannot manufacture a franchise quarterback. They have to pop up in the draft, and this class doesn't give you a remotely clear answer on if these guys will be that, right? In the way that it felt a little bit clearer about guys like Drake May, Caleb Williams, and Jaden Daniels last year. These guys would have been comfortably in that second tier of quarterback that got selected, right? So I don't think you can make the comparison as simple as like, hey, here's your lump of clay, make a franchise quarterback, Kevin Stefanski. Because if Kevin Stefanski could mold a franchise quarterback with a draft pick in his hands, he would be the most valuable head coach of all time. Right? You cannot make.
He would have done it with DTR.
Yeah, like if we could just mold it together out of it, we wouldn't be in this. We wouldn't have traded 3 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson if we didn't feel like the person who plays quarterback also has to be inherently special. So that's just the way of the land. And I'm thinking about quarterback like you guys are thinking about quarterback. Me personally, I'm like, hey, I think you have a better chance of getting somebody special next year versus this year. And with Kirk Cousins, it's just a stopgap to get me to next year without everybody losing their job, right? Because if everybody loses their job, who knows what's going to be a fit at quarterback? And we're doing the same stuff we've done since '99, which is blind drafting the quarterback and hoping it works out.
Yeah, exactly. We've got 2 more comments I want to get to before we exit for the night. First one is from Dean Bowditch. He says, being able to trade Garrett is a moot point. The point is, how does Barry still have a job after he orchestrated the worst trade in NFL history? I hope Garrett holds out as long as he can. Certainly got an opinion there. I have an
Myles
opinion.
Garrett was not opposed to the Browns trading for Deshaun Watson.
No, he was not. He was not. He was not on the anti-Watson bandwagon.
Yeah,
at that point.
he welcomed him in pretty easily here, right? It's interesting how how people have used this trade as a selling point for Myles to want to get out, when it wasn't like Myles was against this trade at any point of it being discussed.
Right.
Almost as if he wanted the Browns to make a win now move like that, but
they just made the wrong one. Like you wanted him to, like, everybody goes back and looks at it in hindsight that it's the worst trade in NFL history. I agree. And if you're like, that one decision should be a chopping block decision, okay, I guess I get that. I understand that. But you overlook everything else. You overlook how much time he put together a roster in 2025 that lost over 25% of the salary cap to injury and made the playoffs. Like, there's been a lot of really good things. And yeah, I get it. The one decision, for some people, that one decision is going to outweigh it, but everybody knows they wanted him to take a big swing, unless they were all on board of Baker Mayfield. I know there's two camps there.
Right.
And remember what it was like when Watson, like, I understand the off the field stuff, but remember, this was a top 10 quarterback. Those guys do not become available. Ever.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
you had to take a swing. Yeah.
It's difficult like with this trade, and look, because Deshaun is who he is, nobody's going to want to even try to, like, be fair about judging if you should have made this trade. Because, like, you can make a moral argument against the trade, right? But if we're talking about this purely from the football standpoint, there was nothing structurally, like, out of place with the trade. Now, maybe you can make that argument against the contract, because that was an extraordinary contract. I would argue if Andrew Berry isn't fired because of that contract, well, maybe it wasn't Andrew Berry that led the charge on that contract, right? Or maybe there was something that maybe there were certain circumstances that played out that made it so that the Browns felt like, well, this is what we have to do. They all agreed on it, and they're not going to just turn around and be like, well, you made that bad decision, when they all three kind of said, hey, no, this is what we want to do going forward. Either way, like, look, for as much as people call Jimmy Haslam impulsive, the fact that he hasn't fired somebody because this is blown up when he was clearly a part of the decision-making process in this whole thing, like, I find that to be a positive sign, because it's like, it would have been real easy for Jimmy to be like, oh man, this wasn't me. This was Andrew Berry that traded for Deshaun. Let me wipe my hands of all of this and fire him. So, look, it's a tough time. It's you got to go through some trials to get to where you want to if you're a Browns fan. There's no doubt about that. But hopefully, because they've had continuity, because they've had accumulation of some guys on this roster, and the roster isn't terrible, they're able to find a way out of this that isn't a complete disaster. And look, we can feel as bad as we want to right now. In the NFL, two things are true. You're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you think you are, right? The Chiefs thought they were going to walk in there, win 3 championships in a row, and be the next dynasty, and Pat's going to be the next Tom Brady. Didn't happen that way. At last year, when the Eagles got eliminated by Baker Mayfield in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we were like, they're done. They're going to fire Nick Sirianni. They're cooked. Yeah. They're spending all that money. What a waste of time. And now we're like, the Eagles are the model franchise of the NFL. We need to do exactly what the Eagles are doing, which the Browns have been doing, right? So it is this thing where you're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you think you are. And just like how the Eagles felt like it was all over, they got to trade house, they got to get rid of everybody, Jalen Hurts is making too much money to win a championship, is the same way that in a year or two, we could feel completely different about where the Browns are, and we can be sitting here on the show, and I'm like, hey, Jacob, remember how bad we felt in the summer of 2025? And then we laugh about it the same way that when the Browns won 11 games in 2020, we were laughing about, man, they went 0-16 3 years ago. So it changes quickly in the NFL, but if you're the Browns, you got to be careful about how you dig yourself out this hole, because what you don't want to do is dig yourself into another hole, right? Don't trade 3 first-round picks for Kyler Murray and end up in the same Deshaun Watson hole that you just tried to dig yourself out of, right? Take your time and get the guy that you truly want at the quarterback position. And if you got to wait a year for that, it's going to be tough, but ultimately, over a period of 5 years, you'll be a better off team because of that, right? The Texans had the opportunity to replace Deshaun Watson immediately with Kenny Pickett. They chose not to. They waited a year. Ended up being a great decision for them, right?
That has worked out for them, yes.
Yeah. So you gotta get it right. If you're gonna do it, if you're the Cleveland Browns. And that's what I hope the organization does going forward, because if we want to end our suffering, it's not going to end because we make a bunch of short-sighted, knee-jerk reaction decisions. That's how we end up being the Browns that we have dreaded over the last 20 years. So let's see how they dig themselves out this mistake, and if they're capable of doing that, just like the Cavs were able to do that, right? The Cavs were able to dig themselves out, be patient, not overreact. So now I'm looking for the Browns to do that, and hopefully in a couple years we're laughing about this. But
the NFL is built so that teams can come back.
Hey, when Matt Stafford got traded from the Lions, like everybody thought they were going to go back to being 0-16 Lions, right?
Right.
Now they're this powerhouse in the NFC right now. So we just gotta remember to think a little bit more long term than I think some fans have been thinking right now, because look, if you try to solve it all this offseason, you're going to run into the same problems, because the Browns been trying to solve all the problems in one offseason for like the last 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. I want to get this in before we go. From Fumble 13, he says, Barry, can we have a get well for my longtime 28-year partner at the Lake County Sheriff's Department, Officer Andrew Steve? He just got home from a heart transplant at the Cleveland Clinic, and he will be watching tonight. Get well, Iceman. So from the OBR, from our team here, Andrew, get well, get better. And Fumble 13, good luck to your partner at the Lake County Sheriff's Department. I live out in Lake County, and I tell you, I'm appreciative for his service and all their service.
They still got the baseball team out there?
Lake County Captains, yep.
Yeah, I remember I used to go out there for field trips. That was fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to watch the Captains game. About 5 miles from my house here, just a couple exits down Route 2.
That's nice.
Yeah. It's nice to have a minor league team nearby. At any rate, Andrew, get well. Quincy, Jacob, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I really appreciate it, filling in for Fred. You're filling in some big shoes for the 30-year vet of the Beat Corps, and really do appreciate you guys helping out tonight and all your input. And it was a fun show. So thanks a bunch for hanging out with me. Appreciate it. And thank you all for watching and your comments and questions during the show. We will be back, at least Fred Greetham and I most likely will be back next Wednesday at 7 o'clock for the next edition of OBR Weekly. Good night, everyone.